I overheard my wife mocking me in bed to her friends and set off a chain of betrayal, desire, and cold revenge that shattered our marriage forever. Ever had that moment when the ground disappears beneath your feet? That's exactly what happened when I heard my wife telling her friends I was terrible in bed. Not just bad, terrible, with details that made my stomach turn. It was supposed to be a normal Saturday evening. We were hosting one of those casual get-togethers at our house. Nothing fancy, just her college friends catching up over wine and appetizers. I had stepped into the kitchen to grab more ice when I heard voices drifting in from the living room. The conversation was flowing, typical girl talk, until I heard my name mentioned. I froze right there by the refrigerator. Something in her tone made me listen closer. "Honestly, girls, I don't know what to do anymore," my wife was saying. He has no idea what he's doing. It's like being with a teenager who learned everything from bad movies." The laughter that followed hit me like a physical blow. These women, who smiled at me and made polite conversation all evening, were now laughing at my expense. "That bad?" one of them asked. "Worse," my wife replied. "He thinks he's some kind of expert, but it's just awkward. Really awkward. I've tried dropping hints, but he doesn't get it. Sometimes I just lie there thinking about my grocery list. More laughter. More details I won't repeat. Each word felt like a knife twisting deeper. I stood there in my own kitchen, ice melting in my hands, listening to my wife of 6 years destroy me in front of her friends. This wasn't some private conversation between best friends. This was a public roasting, and I was the main course. What made it worse was how comfortable she sounded. This wasn't the first time she'd talked about me like this. The way she delivered each punchline, the way her friends responded, it was all too rehearsed, too familiar. I set the ice down and walked quietly toward the living room doorway, staying just out of sight. I needed to see their faces. I needed to understand how deep this betrayal went. "Maybe you should talk to him directly," someone suggested. I recognized the voice as her best friend, the one who always seemed a little reserved around me. Now I was starting to understand why. "Talk to him?" My wife laughed. "And say what, honey? Everything you think you know about pleasing a woman is completely wrong? That would crush him. He's actually proud of himself, if you can believe that." The cruelty in her voice was something I had never heard before. This wasn't the woman I married. This wasn't the woman who told me she loved me every morning. This was someone else entirely. I watched through the crack in the doorway as she took another sip of wine and continued her performance. Her friends were hanging on every word, some looking uncomfortable but still listening, others clearly enjoying the entertainment. "The worst part," she went on, "is he thinks he's being romantic. All those little gestures, the way he tries to set the mood, it's almost sweet if it wasn't so ineffective." That's when something inside me shifted. Not heartbreak, not anger, something colder, more calculating. I had spent years trying to be the husband I thought she wanted. I had listened when she said she needed more attention, more romance, more effort. I had changed my schedule, adjusted my priorities, learned to communicate the way she said she preferred. And this entire time she was using me as material for her comedy routine. I stepped back from the doorway and walked quietly to our bedroom. I needed space to think. I needed to process what I had just discovered. Sitting on the edge of our bed, I replayed every conversation we'd ever had about our relationship. Every time she said she was happy. Every time she told me I was getting better at understanding what she needed. Every time she smiled and said everything was fine. All lies. All performance. The worst part wasn't even the sexual criticism. It was the betrayal of trust. It was the fact that she could look me in the eye every day while secretly mocking me to her friends. I could still hear them talking downstairs, their voices carrying through the house I had worked so hard to provide. The house where I thought we were building something real together. But now I knew the truth. While I was building, she was demolishing. While I was investing, she was withdrawing. While I was trusting, she was betraying. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, letting it all sink in. Part of me wanted to storm downstairs and confront her right there in front of everyone. Part of me wanted to pack a bag and leave without saying a word. But neither option felt right. They felt reactive, emotional, weak. No. This situation called for something different, something more strategic. If my wife wanted to play games, I was about to show her what a real player looked like. If she wanted to humiliate me in private, she was about to learn what public humiliation actually felt like. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I needed to know how long this had been going on, Who else knew, and, most importantly, what her real feelings toward me were? I walked back downstairs with a smile on my face, rejoining the party as if nothing had happened. I made conversation, refilled drinks, and played the role of the perfect host. But inside, everything had changed. The man who had walked into that kitchen was gone. In his place was someone who understood that respect isn't given freely. It's earned, demanded, and, when necessary, taken. The game had officially begun. The next few days were like seeing my life through a completely different lens. Every interaction with my wife became a study in deception. Every smile, every casual touch, every "how was your day" felt like part of an elaborate performance. I decided not to confront her immediately. That would be too easy, too predictable. Instead, I wanted to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. I needed to know if this was just about our intimate life, or if her disrespect ran deeper. It didn't take long to get my answer. Monday morning, she was on the phone with one of her friends while getting ready for work. I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth when I heard her laughing. "Oh, he's trying to be helpful again," she said, clearly talking about me. "He reorganized the garage this weekend. Took him the entire day to do what should have taken 2 hours. Then, in that fake sweet voice she used around me, 'Great job, honey. What else can you do, right?' There it was. The condescending tone wasn't reserved for bedroom talk. It was her default setting whenever she spoke about me to anyone who would listen. I rinsed my mouth and walked past her with a neutral expression. "Have a good day at work," I said, kissing her cheek like always. "You too, babe," she replied sweetly, as if she hadn't just been mocking me 30 seconds earlier. This became my new routine. I started paying attention to everything, the way she talked to me versus how she talked about me. The difference in her voice depending on who was on the phone. The subtle eye rolls when she thought I wasn't looking. Tuesday evening, we were watching TV together when her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and smirked. "What's funny?" I asked casually. "Oh, just the girls planning another get-together. Nothing important," she said. But I caught her typing a response that made her smile in that same way she smiled when entertaining her friends at my expense. Wednesday, I decided to test something. I suggested we try a new restaurant downtown. She agreed, but I noticed how she phrased it when she called to make the reservation. "Yes, it'll be 2 people. My husband saw it online and really wanted to try it," she said with that subtle dismissive tone, like I was a child who had spotted something shiny and she was indulging me. The restaurant experience was illuminating. She was perfectly pleasant throughout dinner, but I watched how she interacted with the waiter. Friendly, engaging, animated. Then she turned back to me and the energy shifted. Not hostile, just less, like she was dimming herself down to match what she thought was my level. At one point, she excused herself to the restroom. While she was gone, the waiter came by. "You two seem like a happy couple," he said casually while refilling our water. "We've been together 6 years," I replied. "That's great. Your wife seems like a lot of fun. Very outgoing." Interesting choice of words. Very outgoing. Not "you both seem fun" or "she seems nice." He had noticed the same thing I was seeing. With me, she was contained. With everyone else, she was vibrant. When she returned, I decided to push a little. "The waiter mentioned you seem very outgoing," I said, watching her reaction. She blushed slightly. "Oh, I was just being friendly. You know how I am." But I didn't know how she was. Apparently, I had never seen the real version of her. The version that existed when I wasn't around to supposedly dim her light. Thursday brought the most revealing moment yet. I came home early from work to find her on a video call with her college friends. I could hear the conversation from the hallway before announcing myself. "I swear, sometimes I feel like I'm living with my dad instead of my husband," she was saying. "Everything has to be practical. Everything has to make sense. There's no spontaneity, no excitement, just routine." I stood there listening as she painted me as some boring, predictable man, holding her back from living her best life, the same man who had surprised her with weekend trips, supported her career changes, and encouraged her expensive hobbies. But in her version of our story, I was the obstacle to her happiness. I made some noise coming through the front door, giving her time to switch gears. "Oh, he's home early," I heard her say. "Gotta go, talk later." By the time I reached the living room, she was off the call and smiling like nothing had happened. "Hey babe, you're home early. Good day?" "Great day," I replied, studying her face. "How about you? Get up to anything interesting?" "Just caught up with the girls for a few minutes." Nothing exciting. just casually destroying her husband's reputation and painting herself as a victim of her own life choices. That night, lying in bed next to her, I realized something important. This wasn't about fixing our relationship. This wasn't about better communication or couples therapy. This was about respect. And respect isn't something you can negotiate for or earn back once it's gone. It's something you either command or you don't. For 6 years, I had been trying to earn something that should have been given freely. I had been working to prove my worth to someone who had already decided I wasn't worth much. But here's what she didn't understand. What none of them understood. The man they were all underestimating wasn't the same man lying in this bed right now. The man they thought they knew would have confronted her tearfully, begged for an explanation, asked what he could do to fix things. The man they were actually dealing with was already 3 steps ahead. Friday morning, she left for work with the usual kiss and have a good day. This time, instead of returning the sentiment, I just smiled and said, "Oh, I will." She gave me a strange look, but didn't ask what I meant. She would find out soon enough. The foundation of her comfortable little life was about to get very shaky, and the man she had been taking for granted was about to remind her why underestimating people is always a dangerous game. But first, I needed one more piece of the puzzle. I needed to know exactly where I stood with the people in her circle, especially her best friend who had seemed different during that conversation I overheard. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Saturday afternoon, my wife had to run errands that would take most of the day. About an hour after she left, there was a knock at the door. It was her best friend, standing on my doorstep with a slightly nervous expression. "Hey," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Is she here? We were supposed to meet up, but she's not answering her phone." "She's out running errands," I replied, stepping aside. "But you're welcome to wait if you want. She should be back in a couple of hours." "Actually," she hesitated, then looked directly at me. "Maybe I could just wait for a few minutes. I've been meaning to talk to you anyway." Interesting. This was definitely not a coincidence. I led her to the living room, the same space where I had heard my wife tear me apart just a week earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Coffee?" I offered. "Sure, thanks." I made 2 cups, using the time to study her body language. She was fidgeting with her purse strap, checking her phone repeatedly, avoiding eye contact. Whatever she wanted to discuss was making her uncomfortable. When I returned with the coffee, she was looking at the photos on our mantel, pictures of my wife and me from trips and celebrations over the years. "You two always seemed really happy," she said, accepting the mug. "Seemed," I repeated. Interesting choice of words. She sat down on the edge of the couch, clearly struggling. "Look, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I've been thinking about some things lately." "What kind of things?" She took a sip of coffee, buying time. "The other night, when we were all here for the party, some of the conversation got pretty intense. There it was. She was bringing it up without me having to fish for it." "How so?" I asked, settling into the chair across from her. "Well, you know how girls can get when they're together. Sometimes they say things they probably shouldn't." She looked up at me, gauging my reaction. "I hope nothing we said was, inappropriate." I leaned back, studying her face. She was testing the waters, trying to figure out how much I knew without revealing how much she remembered. "Define inappropriate," I said calmly. That made her pause. She had expected me to either be oblivious or get defensive. My calm directness threw her off balance. "I just mean, sometimes people exaggerate when they're trying to be funny or say things for shock value that don't really reflect how they actually feel. And you think that's what happened the other night?" She set her coffee down and finally looked me in the eye. "I think some people were being unfair, and I think you deserve better than that." Now we were getting somewhere. "Better than what, exactly?" I pressed. She ran her hands through her hair, clearly frustrated with the situation. "Look, I probably shouldn't be here. I probably shouldn't be saying any of this, but it's been bothering me all week." "What's been bothering you?" "The way she talks about you sometimes. It's not right." I kept my expression neutral, but internally I was fascinated. Her best friend was confirming everything I suspected, and more. "How does she talk about me?" "Like you're some kind of burden instead of her husband. Like you're holding her back or disappointing her somehow." She shook her head. "But that's not what I see when I watch you two together." "What do you see?" "I see a guy who clearly cares about her, who tries to make her happy, who works hard and treats her well." She paused. I see someone who deserves a lot more appreciation than he gets. This was definitely not the conversation I expected to have today. Why are you telling me this? I asked. She looked down at her hands. Because I've been where she is. I used to be with someone I took for granted. Someone I complained about to my friends instead of actually appreciating. And I lost him because of it. What happened? He got tired of being unappreciated. He got tired of feeling like he wasn't enough, so he found someone who actually valued him. She looked up at me again. I realized too late that I had let something really good slip away because I was too stupid to recognize it. The conversation was taking an interesting turn. This wasn't just about defending me, this was personal. So, you're warning me? I asked. I'm telling you that you have options, she said quietly, and that not everyone sees you the way she apparently does. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Can I ask you something? I said finally. Sure. That night, when she was sharing her opinions about our relationship, you seemed uncomfortable. Was that because you disagreed with what she was saying? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Uncomfortable doesn't begin to cover it. I was mortified for you, and honestly, I was embarrassed for her. Why embarrassed for her? Because she has no idea how good she has it. She's so busy focusing on what she thinks is wrong that she's completely blind to what's right. She met my eyes directly, and what's right is pretty impressive. There it was, the confirmation I had been looking for, delivered more directly than I could have hoped. That's quite a compliment, I said. It's quite an honest observation, she replied. I don't give compliments I don't mean. The tension in the room had shifted completely. What started as an awkward conversation about my wife's inappropriate comments had become something else entirely. So what exactly are you suggesting? I asked. I'm suggesting that you deserve to be with someone who sees your value instead of someone who takes it for granted. Someone who builds you up instead of tearing you down to her friends. She stood up then, smoothing her dress. I should probably go before she gets back. Probably, I agreed, standing as well. At the door, she turned back to me. Just think about what I said, okay? You have more options than you realize. After she left, I sat back down in the living room, processing what had just happened. My wife's best friend had essentially told me I was being undervalued, and that she saw me very differently than my wife did. More than that, she had made it clear she was interested in showing me exactly how differently she saw me. This changed everything. While my wife was busy mocking me to her friends, one of those friends was apparently questioning why she was married to someone she clearly didn't appreciate, and that friend was making it known that she would appreciate me very differently. I had to hand it to the situation. Just when I thought I had figured out all the players and their positions, a new variable had entered the game. But this variable might be exactly what I needed to show my wife what real panic looked like. She thought she could disrespect me without consequences. She thought she could take me for granted while I quietly accepted it. She was about to learn how wrong she was on both counts. The following week brought a series of interactions that made it clear her best friend wasn't just being polite during our conversation. She was making a deliberate play. It started with text messages. Nothing inappropriate on the surface, but definitely more frequent than ever before. Hey, saw this article about that restaurant you mentioned. Thought you might find it interesting. Heard a song on the radio that reminded me of our conversation. Hope you're doing well. Random question, but do you have any book recommendations? Looking for something new to read. Each message was perfectly innocent individually, but together they painted a clear picture of someone thinking about me more than she should be. My wife noticed the increased communication during dinner Wednesday night. She's been texting you a lot lately, she said, glancing at my phone as another message came through. Just random stuff, I replied casually. Book recommendations, restaurant suggestions, nothing important. She went back to her meal, but I could see the wheels turning. Her friend had never shown this much interest in communicating with me before. Thursday evening, the situation escalated. My wife was working late, and I was at the grocery store when I ran into her best friend in the produce section. Well, this is a coincidence, she said, but her smile suggested it might not have been entirely accidental. Small world, I replied, continuing to select vegetables. Shopping for one tonight? She asked, noting the smaller portions in my cart. She's working late. Probably won't be home until after 9. That's too bad. I hate eating alone. She moved closer, ostensibly to reach for some apples. Actually, I was thinking about grabbing dinner somewhere. Would you want to join me? As friends, of course. As friends, I repeated, studying her face. Unless you'd prefer it to be something else, she said quietly, meeting my gaze directly. The boldness was impressive. She wasn't playing games or dropping subtle hints. She was putting her cards on the table. "That's quite an offer," I said. "It's quite a situation we're in," she replied. "You deserve better than what you're getting at home, and I'm offering to show you exactly how much better things could be." I had to admire her directness. While my wife was busy taking me for granted, her best friend was making it crystal clear that she saw value in what was being wasted. "And what makes you think you know what I deserve?" I asked. "Because I pay attention. I notice how hard you work to make her happy. I see how thoughtful you are, how much effort you put into your relationship, and I watch her take all of it for granted like it means nothing." She stepped even closer, lowering her voice. "I would never take any of that for granted." The temptation was real, not just the physical attraction, though that was certainly present, but the idea of being with someone who actually appreciated what I brought to the table, instead of mocking it behind my back. "This is dangerous territory," I said. "The best things usually are," she replied. "But sometimes dangerous is exactly what you need to remind yourself what you're actually worth." I looked at this woman offering me everything my wife was withholding: appreciation, respect, desire, the recognition that I was worth more than casual dismissal and public humiliation. "One dinner," I said finally. Her face lit up. "One dinner." We ended up at a small bistro across town, somewhere neither of us was likely to run into anyone we knew. The conversation flowed easily, without the undercurrent of dismissal I had grown accustomed to at home. She asked about my work, my interests, my opinions on things my wife never bothered to discuss. More importantly, she listened, actually listened, engaged, responded with intelligent questions, and thoughtful observations. "Can I tell you something?" she said over dessert. "Go ahead." I've always thought she was crazy for not appreciating what she has. Even before I knew how she talks about you to us, I could see you were putting in way more effort than she was. How could you see that? The way you look at her versus the way she looks at you. The way you remember little details about what she likes, what makes her happy. The way you try to include her in conversations. Make sure she's comfortable at social events. She shook her head. And the way she just takes it all as her due instead of being grateful for it. "Maybe that's just how some relationships work," I said, testing her response. "No," she said firmly. "That's how lazy people treat good partners. That's what happens when someone gets comfortable and stops trying because they think you'll always be there no matter how they behave." She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "You shouldn't have to live like that. You shouldn't have to wonder if you're enough when you're clearly more than enough." The contact sent a jolt through me. Not just physical attraction, but the shock of being touched by someone who wanted to touch me, someone who saw me as desirable instead of obligatory. "This is complicated," I said. But I didn't pull my hand away. "It doesn't have to be," she replied. "It only feels complicated because you've been trained to think you don't deserve better. But you do deserve better, and I'm right here offering it to you." We sat like that for a moment, her hand on mine, the weight of possibility hanging between us. "What happens next?" I asked. "That depends on what you want to happen next," she said. "I've made my position clear. I think you're incredible, and I think you're being wasted. The question is whether you're ready to do something about it." I looked at this woman offering me everything I had been missing: the appreciation, the desire, the respect that should have been mine at home. "I need to think about this," I said finally. "Of course you do," she replied, removing her hand. "But don't think too long. Good opportunities don't wait forever." In the parking lot, she turned to face me before getting in her car. "Thank you for tonight," she said, "for seeing me as someone worth spending time with." "Thank you for seeing me the same way," I replied. She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume, close enough to see the way she was looking at me. "This doesn't have to be the end of this conversation," she said softly. "No," I agreed, "it doesn't." She smiled then, a smile full of promise and possibility. "Good. Because I have a lot more to say." Driving home that night, I realized the game had changed completely. I wasn't just dealing with a wife who disrespected me anymore. I was dealing with a situation where her own best friend was actively pursuing me, offering me everything my marriage was lacking. My wife thought she had all the power in our relationship. She thought she could treat me however she wanted because where else was I going to go? She was about to find out exactly where else I could go, and when she did, the panic she felt was going to be unlike anything she had ever experienced. Because losing your husband is one thing, Losing him to your best friend because of your own behavior is something else entirely. The perfect opportunity to execute my plan came the following Friday. My wife was planning another one of her gatherings, and her best friend would obviously be there. This time, I was going to control the narrative. I spent the week subtly planting seeds. Casual mentions of how much I had enjoyed our dinner conversation, references to books she had recommended, small comments about how refreshing it was to talk to someone who actually listened. My wife noticed, but she was too distracted planning her party to give it much thought. Friday evening arrived, and the usual suspects gathered in our living room, the same women who had laughed at my expense just weeks earlier. But this time, I wasn't the oblivious husband serving drinks and staying out of the way. This time, I was an active participant. I made sure to engage her best friend in conversation early in the evening, right in front of everyone. Nothing inappropriate, but clearly more connected than we had ever been before. "How did you like that book I recommended?" she asked when the group was discussing weekend plans. "Finished it in 2 days," I replied, leaning against the kitchen counter where everyone could see us. "You have excellent taste. I should have asked for your recommendations years ago." The comment hung in the air just long enough for my wife to notice. She glanced over with a slight frown, but the conversation moved on. An hour later, I made my move. While my wife was in the kitchen refilling snacks, I sat down next to her best friend on the couch. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told her quietly, but not so quietly that others couldn't overhear if they were paying attention. "Which part?" she asked, but her smile told me she knew exactly which part. "About recognizing when someone sees your worth." She leaned closer, ostensibly to hear me better over the surrounding conversation. "And what conclusion did you reach?" "That maybe it's time I stopped settling for being undervalued." The women sitting nearby were definitely listening now, though pretending not to. The energy in the room shifted as people tuned in. "I think that's very wise," she said, her hand brushing against mine as she reached for her wine glass. "Life's too short to waste time with people who don't appreciate what they have." That's when my wife walked back into the room. She took one look at us sitting close together, having an intimate conversation that the entire room was focused on, and her face changed completely. "What are you two talking about?" she asked, forcing a casual tone that didn't match her expression. "Just discussing some book recommendations," her best friend replied smoothly. "Your husband has excellent taste in literature. Does he now?" my wife said, but there was an edge to her voice that everyone heard. I stood up, walking over to her with a smile. "She was just telling me about this novel she thinks I'd enjoy. Something about people realizing their worth." My wife's eyes darted between us. I could see the gears turning, the increased texting, the dinner I had mentioned, the obvious comfort level we had developed. She was starting to connect dots she didn't like. "How nice," she said tightly. The evening continued, but the dynamic had shifted. My wife kept glancing between her best friend and me, looking for signs of something she couldn't quite name but definitely sensed. Around 10 o'clock, people started leaving. Her best friend was one of the last to go, and she made sure to say goodbye to me personally. "Thank you for another lovely evening," she said, giving me a hug that lasted just a beat too long. "I hope we can continue our conversation soon." "I'm sure we will," I replied, very aware that my wife was watching from across the room. After everyone left, my wife started cleaning up with unusual intensity, slamming dishes and folding chairs with more force than necessary. "Everything okay?" I asked innocently. "Fine," she snapped. "Just tired. You seem upset about something." She turned to face me, and I could see the confusion and growing panic in her eyes. "Are you having an affair?" The directness surprised me. I had expected her to dance around her suspicions longer. "That's quite an accusation," I said calmly. "That's not an answer. Why would you think I was having an affair?" "Because you're acting different. You're more confident, more secretive, and you and my best friend are suddenly very cozy." I looked at her for a long moment, letting her words hang in the air. "You think I'm having an affair because I seem more confident? I think you're having an affair because something has changed, and I want to know what it is." This was it, the moment I had been building toward. "You want to know what changed?" I asked, stepping closer. "I started paying attention to how you really feel about me, to what you actually think of your husband when you don't think I'm listening." Her face went white. "I don't know what you mean." "Sure you do," I said quietly. "You know exactly what I mean." The panic in her eyes was everything I had hoped for and more. The silence that followed was deafening. My wife stood frozen, her face cycling through emotions as she realized I knew about her private conversations. "I heard everything," I said simply. "That night 3 weeks ago when you entertained your friends with stories about how terrible I am in bed. How I'm like a teenager who learned everything from bad movies. How you lie there thinking about your grocery list." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. "But here's the interesting part," I continued, enjoying her obvious panic. "Your best friend didn't laugh along with everyone else. In fact, she seemed pretty uncomfortable with the whole performance. What? She came to see me, told me I deserved better, said she couldn't understand how you could take someone like me for granted." I paused, watching her face crumble. "And then she proved it." "Proved what?" she whispered. "That not everyone sees me the way you apparently do. That some women actually find me attractive, engaging, worth their time and attention." My wife stumbled backward, gripping the kitchen counter. "Are you sleeping with her?" "Does it matter?" I asked. "You've already made it clear what you think of me. You've already told everyone who'll listen that I'm a disappointment. So why do you care what I do now? Because you're my husband." "Really? Because according to what I heard, I'm more like a burden. You're stuck with a boring, predictable man who holds you back from your exciting life." Tears started streaming down her face. "I didn't mean it like that." "How did you mean it then? When you told your friends that being with me was awkward and embarrassing? When you said I was proud of myself for being terrible? How exactly was I supposed to interpret that? I was frustrated. People exaggerate when they're venting." "Frustrated about what?" "About having a husband who works hard, treats you well, and tries to make you happy. About being married to someone who actually gives a damn about your feelings." She was sobbing now, the reality of the situation finally hitting her. "Please, we can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can talk about what I did wrong, what you did wrong." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You humiliated me in front of your friends. You spent years taking everything I did for granted while mocking me behind my back. And now that you realize someone else sees value in what you've been throwing away, you want to fix things?" "Yes, I want to fix this." "Too late," I said flatly. "You don't get to disrespect someone for years and then panic when they find someone who actually appreciates them." Her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it reflexively, and I could see it was from her best friend. "She's texting you," I observed. "Probably wondering how tonight went. Whether you figured out what was happening between us." My wife looked at the phone like it was a bomb about to explode. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "You're going to learn what it feels like to lose something because you didn't value it. You're going to understand what real consequences look like." "Are you leaving me?" "I'm showing you exactly what happens when you treat good people badly. When you take loyalty for granted and mock the person who's been trying to love you." She collapsed into a chair, the full weight of her situation crushing down on her. She had lost her husband's respect, discovered her best friend was pursuing him, and realized her own behavior had created this entire mess. "I can change," she pleaded. "I can be better." "You could have been better any time in the last 6 years, I replied. "But you chose to be dismissive and disrespectful instead. You chose to entertain your friends at my expense, rather than appreciate what you had. So that's it? You're just done?" I looked at this woman who had shared my life for so long but had never really seen my worth. "I'm done accepting less than I deserve. I'm done being with someone who sees me as a source of entertainment rather than a partner. And her, your best friend, she sees something in me that you never did. She appreciates qualities you take for granted. She treats me like I'm worth something." The irony was perfect. My wife had spent so much time telling people how inadequate I was that she had convinced her own best friend to pursue me. Her disrespect had created the very situation she was now terrified of. "Please," she whispered one more time. "Some mistakes can't be fixed," I said, heading toward the stairs. "Some damage can't be undone. You made your choice when you decided I wasn't worth treating well." As I walked upstairs, I could hear her crying harder. But for the first time in weeks, I felt completely calm. The man who had been taken for granted was gone. In his place was someone who knew his worth and refused to accept anything less than he deserved. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.